Call on Brother James. He's the creator and the host of the Political Cesspool, a syndicated talk radio program. When not interviewing newsmakers, Edwards is no stranger to making news himself, having often appeared as a commentator on national TV. For the past 2 decades, his groundbreaking work has been subject of articles in hundreds of publications worldwide. His first book, Racism, Spacism, How Liberals Use the R Word, was published in 2010. In 2016, Mr. Edwards was listed by a well-funded leftist media watchdog group alongside Ann Coulter as one of the top 20 right-wing media fixtures responsible for Donald Trump. Hillary Clinton later named him as an extremist who would shape our country. We can only hope. Brother James, we can only hope.
Thank you. It is so good to see so many old friends and old faces from battles past. We share scars together. Mike Gaddy, where's Mike at?
Right here, sir.
There he is. We like Mike. Did y'all like Mike's talk earlier today, this guy? I first got to know Mike about 20 years ago. He was down on the border with the Minutemen Project, and he would call into the radio station every night from a payphone. Do y'all remember what those were? Put a quarter in it and you call somebody up. Well, that was a long time ago. I think they're still in museums maybe. But Brad Griffin, just another guy who's a couple of years younger than me, but it's really informed so many of my opinions over the years. Mark Tommy's in the room. I hesitate to start naming people because everyone deserves to be mentioned. I see Pat Godwin in the back. God bless you, Pat. But let the biggest round of applause be for the people responsible for bringing us all together today, Mike Wharton and Ed Bordwine. I'm proud this big on a weekday. I've never seen anybody else who can do that, and I've been around for a minute. We were all together last year, or at least I was here last year. I know many of you were as well. Maybe some of you are here for the first time, but as soon as I saw the property this morning, it felt like I was coming home. It's great to be back. We had a great time last year, and we're going to have a great time the rest of this weekend too. I actually got in touch with Mike about a week ago just to make sure I understood everything for this weekend, and I said, happy to come back and do the show, and we'll do that tomorrow night, and see you soon. He said, well, don't forget, you're giving a talk. And I said, no, I thought we were just doing the show this year. And he said, no, you're giving a talk. I said, you said last year after I talked, you only wanted good speakers this year. So anyway, but I'm back. So we put together something on a spit and polish. There's something I want to read to you that is one of the most beautiful things I have ever read in my life. And anytime I have an opportunity to share it, I try. And I think it would be a good thing to read to set the tone for the next few minutes. It is a quote by a former United States Senator, Ed Carmack. And he wrote, "The South is a land that has known sorrows. It is a land that has broken the ashen crust and moistened it with tears. A land scarred and riven by the plowshare of war and billowed with graves of her dead. But a land of legend, a land of song, a land of hallowed and heroic memories. To that land, every fiber of my being, every drop of my blood, every pulsation of my heart is consecrated forever. I was born of her womb, I was nurtured at her breast, and when my last hour shall come, I pray God I may be pillowed upon her bosom and rocked to sleep within her tender and encircling arms." It's hard to even read that because of the chills. I want to talk to y'all about the South today. Is that okay? I said, is that okay? But before I do, I'm going to take you back for the benefit of folks who don't know who I am. I'm going to roll back the clock a quarter of a century, back to the dawn of this century, late 99 and early 2000. That's when I got my start working for probably the last presidential candidate who spoke to an SCV convention reunion, Pat Buchanan. And I got to know Pat, and he came on the show quite a few times. And he was a great man, and had such a great year that year in 2000 that I wanted to keep the band together after that campaign was over. And we were able to do that by me running for a state in the Tennessee State Legislature in 2002. And even though I got walloped, I really ran to win. And I thought, the only reason we haven't won is because I wasn't there yet. And we were going to go out and we were going to fight. We were going to knock on every door. And we had a campaign headquarters and we had yard signs and we hit every house in that district. And we did it the best as we could with the amount of money that we had. And I got a shade under 20% of the vote, which looking back on it now was actually, for an independent 22-year-old kid in a three-way race against the Speaker of the House, it made that 60-point thrashing look a little bit better than it did that night. And we did just well enough to get a call made just enough of a name for ourselves in the local community to get a call to start a radio show on an AM station that was switching to a talk format. And had a couple of months to think about what kind of show we wanted that to be before we went on the air. And I thought to myself, well, I don't know how long this is going to last, but for as long as it does, we're not going to do it the way everybody else does it. We're not going to be every local talk radio, whatever city you're in, the local talkers, envision themselves to be a budding Sean Hannity or something if they fully develop. And I don't want to be like that guy at all. I hate that guy. And so I said, if we're going to do this, there's going to be three pillars of this show. We're going to be pro-Christian, we're going to be pro-South, and we're going to be pro-white. And these are the things we're going to talk about. These are the things we're going to talk about. And people ask me how long we did that before we started to take some fire. And as Dr. Reverend King said, how long, not long. It didn't take us very long until they were coming down on us. Matter of fact, one of the first articles written about the show, we cut our teeth on Confederate park issues and Confederate monuments, which we had 3 beautiful ones in Memphis at the time, including, of course, the grave of General Forrest, which I think his monument may be the most magnificent equestrian monument that was ever cast. I don't think there's anything else that can compare to it. And in the mid-2000s, 2005, they were coming for those parks, and I said, well, this gives us an opportunity. We have this radio program now, and when people rally, organize something in defense of the parks, we'll be able to throw in and try to get a few extra people to turn out. And kept waiting and waiting and waiting for somebody to do something, and nobody did. And so we did, and we took out a permit, and we had what we called a vigil to protect our Confederate parks. And Pat and Butch were there. Rest his soul, Pat and Butch were there. They got their picture in the paper, front page A1 of the Memphis Commercial Appeal, wearing their you were on. Yeah, that's right. The network news too, the TV broadcast. You had your Forrest T-shirts on. Y'all looked real good in that one. And this is what the article read. The staff of the Political Cesspool organized a rally at Confederate Park, which along with 2 other Confederacy-themed parks in downtown Memphis have been the subject of long-time controversy for honoring Confederate soldiers. The park had been criticized earlier by a black Shelby County official, which attracted the notice of New York-based activist Al Sharpton, who was invited to hold a demonstration in Memphis. Sharpton planned a march from downtown Memphis to another park honoring Confederate Lieutenant General Nathan Bedford Forrest. Sharpton canceled the march after James Edwards and the Political Cesspool staff obtained a permit to demonstrate on their planned march route. Sharpton settled for a protest at Forest Park. At the demonstration, he argued that we need to show the rest of the world that the day for honoring people like this is over. It will never be over. There will never come a day when men like Nathan Bedford Forrest should not be honored and defended by the people who are on the watch now. Estimates of attendance at the rally, according to the Southern Poverty Law Center, James Edwards attracted about 200 white counter-demonstrators to the Confederate Park Vigil, while Sharpton's protest at Forest Park attracted a few dozen black demonstrators whom Edwards referred to as rabble. Now, that was our first kind of hit at it, and then the hits just kept on coming. And as Mike said, now 20 years later, can you believe it, 20 years? The days have been long, but the years have been short. It does not seem like it's been 2 full decades, but it's been a wonderful ride. And we have had the opportunity to talk to just a lot of very interesting people without ever apologizing, without ever backing down for our sincere and heartfelt beliefs. And people ask all the time, some of the people you remember most interviewing, there are some standouts. I mean, of course, we have our mainstay guests, which we have in a regular rotation that we love, and they come on and they always deliver. But there have been a few that were rather remarkable. One being, if anybody remembers this guy's name, if you don't know his name, you'll probably recognize a photo if I showed it to you. His name was Officer Drew Lackey. And it sounds like somebody down here in Alabama knows who Drew Lackey is. He's one of your sons. One of the sons of this state. Now, he was the police officer pictured in the iconic photograph fingerprinting Rosa Parks on the night of her arrest. And he actually went on to become the chief of police in Montgomery during that unfortunate era. And he wrote a book called Another View of the Civil Rights Movement. And in this book, which I have a copy of course, Chief Lackey passed away a few years ago now, but he used his eyewitness recollections to outline the so-called civil rights movement as being nothing more than a forerunner to the kind of violence and anarchy that we've seen more recently from Black Lives Matter. And it's just amazing to have an opportunity to give men like that a platform. That is real history. That is the kind of history that if the History Channel was sincere, if they aired anything other than stuff about UFOs and lumberjacks, that they would have a guy like that on. That would be a guy that you would want to have on, right? I mean, he was there. And on the show, he talked about his personal interactions with Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks and all of this, and he put it all down in this book. We had the opportunity to talk to him about it. Another interesting guy, very interesting guy, more interesting than you think he might be, was unfortunately, I go through my phone these days, and once you get in, it's like Hotel California. If I put your name in my contacts list, you're always there. And as I scroll through my phone now, more and more people have gone on to receive their eternal reward. And this is another one. Mel Gibson's father was a fascinating guy. His name was Hutton Gibson. And he came on, and he was actually a historian in his own right, and he traveled in our circles, but he came on, and Hollywood really just came down. All of the Hollywood media was talking about him coming on the program. They focused in on one particular thing he said about the Pope he's a Catholic, and he's a cradle Catholic, and down here in the South, we don't have a lot of those, but he is a old school Catholic, and it takes issue with the Catholic Church, just like we may take issue with a lot of the leadership of our denominations. As a Southern Baptist here, I've got a lot of issues there, but he said in his opinion, the Pope was, to put it in his word, queer. And Hollywood really latched on to that one, but he never backed down. And there are some people, and this is something, if you find somebody who doesn't back down, that's somebody that you can win with. And he never backed down. He never apologized. He continued his association. And we talked about everything in that interview, from Catholicism to Francisco Franco. And he had interesting things to say about all of them. Another one, again, not necessarily names but faces you have seen. Sonny Landham was a very good friend of mine. If anybody's ever seen the movie Predator, this guy was the kickoff speaker at our kickoff event back in 2004, and he became a very good friend. He's passed away now too. But the next time you watch Predator, when you see that big Indian taking the Bowie knife to his chest on the bridge before the fight with the alien, know this, that big old Indian was more pro-white and more pro-South than a lot of white Southerners. And that's just a very interesting thing. And these are some of the people. And we've had a lot of entertainers and celebrities, Ted Nugent, Ray Stevens, people like that have stopped by over the years. But the key is to talk to these folks without compromising on your beliefs. And, elected officials. I think the first U.S. congressman that ever came on, his name was Walter Jones out of North Carolina. He too, I think I'm going to find somebody here in a minute that's still alive, but he was actually a good guy. He came on back in 2012, and this was not a popular opinion in the Republican Party at that time, was to be against these foreign entanglements and these foreign wars. And it was interesting because he was actually the guy who came up with the whole freedom fries thing, if you'll remember that. And then he had a complete change of heart and became to oppose these foreign entanglements. And he was interesting. And more recently, I was down with Steve King for a week in Orlando earlier this year. He's become a regular. The point is this. The work we've done is important, but the work we're doing is important too. The week after Donald Trump was shot, we had a former Secret Service agent on the show. He was actually on the protective detail team of Bill Clinton, and he had some very interesting things to say about the Secret Service, compared them to the post office in terms of efficiency and things of that nature. The week of the Republican National Convention, a couple of weeks ago, we had another former congressman on who was there reporting from the scene. We had just, of course, the riots in England, a member of European Parliament on the show last week. So listen, anybody can do that though. Anybody can get into radio and talk to elected officials or celebrities or entertainers or whoever. But I think the key to what we've done that I'm proud about is that we've been able to talk to some of these people and make some inroads into the mainstream without sacrificing our positions on the issues. And I've got to tell you, no revolution, no successful revolution is bottom up. They're all top down. And so for our movement to grow, I think we're going to have to do the best we can to develop relationships with people like this, with rogue members of the elite, because that is what's going to advance our flag. And you can do that if you come across as normal. If you come across as normal, they might not agree with you on everything, but they will work with you if you can earn their trust and not break it. And we're able to network behind the scenes and talk to people like this. And it's just more than talk, though. There's actually some things getting done that I'm proud about. But it does help bridge the gap that connects influential people and the general public to our unflinching message, which, again, is pro-Christian, pro-South, pro-white, in that order. So in that way, we have been able to plant a flag. Talking about the media attention, the very first time that we mentioned the Al Sharpton thing, but the first time we were really big in the national news, CNN actually had me on for, I had a very short-lived career as an on-air contributor to CNN, where they would bring us up to, if you can believe it, in the mid-2000s, they would bring me up to talk about different issues that they knew that I would deliver a different point of view on, whether it be immigration or race or whatever. Now, of course, the mainstream media, establishment media, controlled media, whatever you want to call them, they're all of that. They don't offer invitations to folks like us anymore. But back in those days, they did, and so we were able to plant a flag, and that gets me back to the South. The first time I went up to Manhattan for a CNN appearance was back in the spring of 2007. And they sent a limousine to the house. I mean, it was all first class transportation to and from the airports, first class flight, all of that. And real posh hotel in the middle of Central Park. I mean, it was nice. And it was a really rare thing in that, not just to be on a primetime show on a major network at that time, which in the mid-2000s, cable network news was still very big. And but it was on for a full hour. Now that's normally reserved for people like Donald Trump or something like that, or a major presidential candidate, but we were on for a full hour. I say we because it's embarrassing. I don't like saying I or me, it's the royal we, but was on for a full hour to talk about segregation. And of course, they cast me as the villain because they knew I would defend it, which I did. But I thought we did a pretty good job of that. And that was prime time, live, 8 o'clock Eastern. And after it was over, the driver asked me where I wanted to go. And, we were in New York, and I didn't know how, if I would be back there. We did have an opportunity to go back a few times. But I said, well, let's see Times Square. I was hungry. It was after the show. I was going to get something to eat. And I can remember driving to Times Square and looking around. You've seen Times Square. You look around at it, standing in the middle of it, just taking it all in. And the strangest thing, and I can still remember this as clear as day, walking around in Manhattan, Times Square, And the only thing I could think about was Mississippi. I was thinking about those red dirt hills. There was something about the birthplace of my grandparents that came to me in that moment. And it was warm, and you know what those red hills are like, because I saw some driving up here today. You've got them in Alabama just like they've got them in Mississippi. And it was warm, and it was comforting, and I would have much rather been there. I'd have rather been on a dirt road in Mississippi than in Times Square that night. And that may sound strange to some people, not to you folks, of course, but to some people that may sound a little backwards. But those are the people who aren't tethered to something eternal. They can't understand our unwillingness to abandon our customs and our folkways and our way of life. But this is who we are. And so it's very personal, and I cannot and you cannot be separated from that. And I want my 3 children, my son's here today in the back, and I have 3 children, and I raised them to think exactly like I do. I want them to cherish our Southern heritage. I want them to love this land and their ancestors every bit as much as I do. And we take a point, I make a point to go down for little day trips to the places where my grandparents were born, my great-grandparents were born. Pontotoc, Mississippi, Corinth, Mississippi. And Pontotoc is not unlike, if you've ever been to Pontotoc, I doubt many people have. You have? So, a little town square in Pontotoc is not unusual as far as southern Main Street USA's go, but a beautiful, beautiful Confederate monument at the center of town square in Pontotoc, and just proudly featured at its center. And there's hundreds of such monuments that serve as the heart of town and county squares across the South. But in Pontotoc, the inscription reads, "Love's tribute to the soldiers who marched beneath the stars and bars and were faithful to their duty. This monument is erected in grateful remembrance." And the front simply reads, "Our heroes, 1861 to 1865. The sentry atop the monument stands faithfully on his eternal watch, and I never feel more at peace than when I'm there. Life moves at a slower pace in the rural South. It's almost an otherworldly calm that comes when you talk to the rural townspeople and you're eating supper at one of the family-owned diners. They have a little town museum there that's inside the post office. It's free of charge. It's wonderful. I mean, this is who we are. And then we drive over to this little community called Thaxton, and it's just, Thaxton is 3 buildings. It's a town hall, a grocery store with a gas pump, and a couple of churches, and a lot of graveyards and a lot of graves. And I'm so proud of this way of life that's been handed down to me. And I'm taken back to my childhood. You can go down there right now, and it's like this all over the South. You go to this little community center, and the 1950 senior class photo of my maternal grandmother still is hanging on the wall. All of those class pictures are. This little wooden basketball court with a wooden basketball backboard. It's just like 2x4s. Still there where my grandfather played so many decades prior. And it's bittersweet and endearing to go back there. Time stands still there, and it puts my spirit at ease. And my grandparents, like so many, I'm sure, on both sides of my family, my mom's parents and my dad's parents, born in rural Mississippi, but they moved up to Memphis to find work because it was the nearest big place to find work. But they were, the children of poor sharecroppers. They themselves picked cotton. I don't know, did anybody know that white people pick cotton? Any white people in here pick cotton? God bless you. And they picked cotton, and they were very poor and had this ramshackle house and no heat. They all had to sleep together. They had big families back then. They took replacement level fertility seriously just a couple of generations. 11 or 12 brothers and sisters on both sides, and they would huddle together in the winter to stay warm. That was just the way they did it. But that's white privilege. Don't forget that. But honestly, there is no virtue in poverty. People say, you're not necessarily a good person because you were born into poverty. You're just poor. But there is virtue in sacrifice and in hard work. And that generation, That generation and the generations before it engaged in much harder work than I have ever known, which is just one of the reasons I take great pride in being able to go back and visit these places and pay respects at their graves, the graves of my kinfolk, my ancestors. And even though my children can never know them, it means so much to me to be able to teach my kids about who they were and raise them in the same traditions and with the same ethics that were handed down to me. These were great people who left a legacy, and it's important that we raise the next generation to love one another and to love their ancestors, because a deep reverence for our people is fundamental. It's a fundamental cornerstone of a healthy society, and we try to instill that. And sons and daughters of the South are never too young to learn about their heroes, especially the ones in your own family tree. Keep it personal. And of course, the ones in our family trees who fought for the Confederacy. And to be directly descended from this line of brave and fighting Christian men is a patrimony worthy of preservation. Of course, the South was right. The South was right, but other people and other groups and other parts of the world have been right throughout history. It's not just the right and the wrong of it that compels me to stand for my people, but it certainly doesn't hurt that their cause was just. But just having that birthright, knowing that the blood in our veins that flows is descended from and given to us from the last group of men who fought that way on this continent. They were the last force that stood in defiance, in real defiance, against this Leviathan that terrorizes us now. We descended from a brave and fighting people, and that is something special. And I thank God for Him having seen fit for me to come into this world as a Southern man and to have been born and raised in this place. And what is love? What is love if not sacrificing for your family and standing at the ready to defend their honor? I joke, I tell this joke every time. It's probably stale now. I don't think it's a joke, though, but I descended from the only private in the Confederate Army. I have people all the time talk about the generals and all of these other people they descended from. I think not just one. I think everybody in my tree. And by the way, everybody in my tree that was of fighting age at that time did their duty, and they all went out and fight. But they were all privates. I don't think anybody ever got out of that. Went above private, but you got to have privates, am I right? But I was talking about Corinth. My great-grandfather actually had the saddle that his ancestor, my ancestor, had in the war, and there was bloodstains on it. And I don't know how many of them he got, or if it was his, but I hope he got a lot of them. But anyway. But it was from Corinth that he marched to Shiloh. And during that legendary battle, he shared the battlefield with one of Michael Hill's ancestors, and probably some of your ancestors as well, from this part of the South. They were there. And I mentioned Pat Buchanan earlier. Years later, a few years ago now, Pat told me a story about one of his own great-great-grandfathers who was a first lieutenant in the 31st Mississippi Infantry, and he lived in Okolona, Mississippi. Now, Okolona is practically within walking distance of Pontotoc, and it's right there near Corinth as well. And I sometimes wonder whether those of us who are committed to keeping the flame aren't predestined to find each other during our own lifetimes. It certainly seems that way, that there's just something about our spirit that draws us to kindred spirits, and then you find out that our ancestors were together. It's a beautiful thing. I was born 115 years after Appomattox, but still get chills every time I hear Dixie or read accounts of these gallant attempts that these men made in their war to protect their loved ones from federal oppression and tyranny. And that's a feeling that only a true Southerner can know, and it transcends time and space. Now, speaking of families, there's a couple of things I always like to read when I'm speaking to a Southern group. And one of them is a letter that was mailed to me by a listener of my radio program. This was a letter that was sent to his great-grandmother by the state of Florida in December of 1933. So his great-grandmother by that time was a widow. Her husband had been a Confederate veteran, and she still received his pension check. And this letter was sent to her right before Christmas, 1933, and it accompanied that pension check. And this is what it reads. It's addressed to Miss Sarah McGahee of Tampa, Florida. Dear friend, I consider it quite fortunate on my part in being selected as the official charged with the responsibility of mailing you the enclosed pension check. It's a rare privilege and a pleasure to forward you this token of appreciation of the great state of Florida. I sincerely wish you and yours a very Merry Christmas and a surprisingly Happy New Year. Personally, I feel a debt of gratitude owed to you by the Commonwealth of this state that cannot be estimated in material wealth and therefore cannot be composed by mere payment of money. It is a liability that cannot be expressed in dollars, but it can be enshrined in the sacred archives of tradition. And by teaching the succeeding generations that by your actions, experience, and devotion to a sacred principle, you have proved that God does not force us into deep water to drown us, but to cleanse us, and that adversity is the trial of principle without which one hardly knows whether or not he is honest, unless, like those who fought for the lost cause, he is sorely tried, smelted, polished, and glorified in the furnace of our tribulation. If we remain true to our ideals and steadfast to our principles, as exemplified by those who follow the stars and bars, we are reminded that honor is likened to certain herbs and flowers. They send forth their most delightful odors only after they have been crushed and broken. Therefore, we should, all of us, profit from the experience and example of you brave souls who have conquered discouragement and despair and have, phoenix-like, risen from the dead ashes of destitution and want to the heights of honor, peace, and tranquility. May that one in whose honor we observe Christmas comfort and keep you. Very sincerely, J.M. Lee, Comptroller, State of Florida. How about that? I mean, 1933, it wasn't that long ago, not really. Blink of an eye. How could the world so ardently hate people like that man and that woman? That man who we just read that letter, a man capable of composing such awe-inspiring sentiments. Well, they hate him, and they hate you. Ultimately, because they hate Jesus Christ. And Christ told us that since they hate him, they will also hate us. But most immediately, because the faith of our fathers makes us effective opponents of those who desire to enslave people to debt and to governance, which does not produce societies that foster accomplishment, justice, and courage, all of which are, of course, hallmarks of Southern culture. And if they can purge faith and family from our hearts, then it's only a matter of time before they can dominate and destroy us. And if they take out their toughest opposition, they can dominate the world. However, when one is tethered to eternal truths, you'll feel the same willingness to sacrifice yourself for your people as Paul did when he wrote in Romans, "For I wish that myself were accursed from Christ for my brethren, my kinsmen according to the flesh." You'll feel the same imperative to protect your genetic line as Abraham did when he told his servant in Genesis, "But thou shalt go unto my country and to my kindred and take a wife unto my son Isaac." And you'll feel the displeasure of God, who said through Paul, "But if any provide for not his own, and especially for those of his own house, he has denied the faith and is worse than an infidel." I'm middle-aged now, and maybe a hair over that, but when looking back on my life to this point, I grow more thankful each day that I was born into a family with a mother and father who loved me enough to take me to church every Sunday. And I spent every weekend during those early years of my life marinating either on a pew in a small Southern Baptist church. And by the way, this congregation and this fellowship today really reminds me of those years. It's a beautiful thing and beautiful people. Or I was there in Mississippi visiting relatives, and the lessons learned in both places on those formative Sundays made me a better man and a more effective advocate. And it all still holds a special place in my heart. And I shudder to think what paths my own life might have taken had it not been for that solid foundation upon which my upbringing was built. I was very fortunate to have had the stability of a nuclear family, parents and grandparents who always knew, always loved, the importance of cultural and spiritual heritage that complement one another, and the difference between right and wrong. And this is a nest that in which healthy families will flourish. And these are the communities and the homes that we seek to restore. And by the time I reached adulthood, I knew that serving as an advocate for our unique people group, our race, which is what our extended family is. We're all family here. And that bridges the gap between our distant ancestors and our future progeny, because we do fight for our past and our present and our future all at once. And such a connection gives our finite time on this earth fulfillment and meaning. How utterly meaningless the life of the typical vapid American consumer must be. You are all so rich and so lucky that you have something more to define your lives than what you've bought or what you've eaten. Amen. Thank you. But even the struggle can be animating and fulfilling. The struggle itself is a reward. Our people need to struggle. This is our problem. We've become too comfortable. We need to suffer a little bit, and we need to struggle, and we need to endure. The attacks and defamations that we suffer should be welcomed because they build character. And as that letter that I read to you a moment ago, if you don't go through that, if you don't go through adversity, how can you know whether or not you're honest or true? And because great men are never made except through great trials. Adversity isn't an obstacle, but rather an opportunity, our greatest opportunity to get better, to forge our character, to work harder and to become smarter and to prove our worth. And you're not going to know what you're made of until the time comes and you make a decision. And our southern forebears knew that all too well. When you face that crucible with steadfast resolve, then you have honored your ancestors and solidified your standing as a man. It's a gift from God to be tested. And the thing about it is, and I probably don't need to tell you this, you've seen it so many times, so many men who haven't been through these trials with the media or with whomever think that if they can just apologize hard enough, that if they can just explain it well enough, that they're going to go easy on them. I'll tell you, they will never go easy on you, and they will only come harder if you show them that weakness. They are filled with a diabolical hatred that is completely unadulterated. You will never curry their favor, nor should you want to. So they're going to write what they're going to write in those instances, and you're not going to there's nothing you can do to stop that. But there is one thing that they cannot take from you. They can slur you, they can libel you, they can slander you, they can bankrupt you. They can harm you, but the one thing that they cannot do is that they cannot take your self-respect and your integrity unless you put it on offer and you give it to them by apologizing for things that you know are true and by betraying your brothers and by betraying your birthright. Never betray a brother. Never betray your ancestors. I'm from Tennessee, as you know, and as one of the great heroes of Tennessee, Davy Crockett once remarked, "Be always sure you're right, then go ahead." We'll never apologize or capitulate for things that we know to be true to those who seek our destruction and ruin. We dishonor ourselves with shame to our name by shrinking from our duties during times of hardship. And it should also be remembered that the sacrifices we make, the sacrifices that we are making right now, and there are sacrifices, they are real. I am not saying that they're not, but they do, by every standard of measurement, pale in comparison to the sacrifice of blood and bone that were given by our betters. By our betters. like this Southern woman I'm about to read about again. I cannot read this letter enough. I love this letter, and it's very instructive. It was written about a woman, a Southern woman, who gave the ultimate sacrifice. On June the 3rd, 1864, Robert Audrey of Company B, the 111th Illinois Infantry, mailed a letter to his father describing some action his unit had seen. Dear Father, I take pen in hand to let you know I am well. We are encamped near Dallas, Georgia, where we found the enemy in force on the 26th. The 111th was in the front of the line of the breastworks, and we drew hot fire from the Rebs until about 4 o'clock, when the enemy viciously charged our works. We poured hot fire into their ranks and several times until their lines broke, but they rallied again and came on with guns blazing and flags waving. They fought like demons, and we cut them down like dogs. Many dead and dying Secesh fell prisoner. I saw 3 or 4 dead rebel women in the heap of bodies. All had been shot down during the final charge upon our works. One Secesh woman charged within several rods of our works, waving the traitor flag and screaming vulgarities at us. She was shot 3 times, but still she came. She was finally killed by 2 shots fired almost simultaneously by our boys. Another she-devil shot her way to our breastworks with 2 large revolvers, dealing death to all in her path. She was shot several times with no apparent effect. When she ran out of ammunition, she pulled the largest pig sticker I ever seen. It must have been 18 inches in the blade. When the corporal tried to shoot her, she kicked him in the face, smashing it quite severely. Then she stabbed 3 boys and was about to decapitate a 4th when the lieutenant killed her. Without a doubt, this gal inflicted more damage to our line than any other Reb. If Bobby Lee were to field a brigade of such fighters, I think that the Union prospects would be very gloomy indeed, for it would be hard to equal their ferocity and pluck. That had to be Pat Godwin's, that had to be one of Pat Godwin's line right there. But maybe it was such a story that led W.E.B. Du Bois to famously write that, quote, across this path stands the South with a flaming sword. One thing I do know is that a man who refuses to defend his family is no man at all. How dare the Vandals and the Visigoths of multiculturalism assume that they can cast aspersions on our people and our dead and our folkways? Of course, having a separate culture from that of your surrounding geographical areas is the very prerequisite of being a separate nation. And still to this day, as we sit here in this moment, the South still has that, especially the rural South. Maybe it's not as vibrant as it once was, but it's still got a pulse. And as long as it's got a pulse, we can live and we can revive. We still have unique traditions, faith, and heroes and history, and even our own suffering, which again, is so important because a group of people that suffers together is bound together. It was the South's suffering that forged us together and gave us an identity that still lives today. Each component is essential to the uniqueness of the Southern nation. It's personal, and if you allow yourself to get separated from all of that makes you who you are, you're dead already. You may be breathing, you may be going to and from work and performing various tasks, but that's not the same as being truly alive. Thankfully, those who are here today are not yet dead in either body or soul. Dixie must endure. On the South Carolina license plates, you can still see a phrase in Latin when translated to English. While I breathe, I hope. I hope that our people can still rise up and reclaim their destiny. I think that we can. That was the whole point of my talk here last year when I was playing Martin Luther King to Brad Griffin's Abernathy and letting him write large parts of that speech. That's a terrible example. But no, listen, Brad did have a lot of great things that I was able to talk about because he had done so much research into not just the anecdotal data, but the hard polling data. People are coming over. Did you know, and I talked about this last year, that the majority in a 3-way question of white Republican voters, and the question is, are you in favor of secession? Yes, no, or unsure? That the majority is yes, in favor right now. So why haven't we seceded yet? Well, there's a problem. People are still too comfortable. We have come, I was talking with a gentleman earlier today. Yes, we have made more strides. You may not see it outside right now, but there's something going on in the spirit and in our hearts of the Southern people, of the white Trump class voting public. They are not that far away. You're going to have to wait. I'm sorry, you've got to wait a little bit longer for timing and circumstance to intersect. Something's got to kick it off. But in terms of just, you've got nothing to work with, we've got something to work with. What we're working with, and this is human nature, still a little bit too comfortable, and they still can keep food in the fridge and heat and air, and thank God for the air and the summer down here, but they're still comfortable enough. But ideologically, they are ready for someone to step in and lead them. They are waiting to be led. They want to be led. They are ready. They are just not uncomfortable enough yet. And unfortunately, that time may come. But if and when it does, and when it does, I think we're closer now than at any point in my life to being on the precipice of actual and real change. So yes, I think that we can turn this thing around. I'm not even thinking about anything else. History, it's cliche. History hasn't been written yet. It's not always going to be this way, though. If you think that this history teaches us that all corrupt and gluttonous empires fall. America, this one will not be different. It is unfortunate that all of us were born in this terrible time, this nadir of the American experiment, where we've just sat and watched things get progressively worse, which is what, when you hear the word progress being mentioned in the media, something's getting progressively worse. That's what progressives are all about, making things progressively worse. But it's human nature to just look at the situation from the narrow lens of your own life and to say, well, it's just gotten worse all these years. It's always going to be that way. Our time on life isn't very long. It's not always going to be this way. It wasn't this way for our European forebears who lived under Muslim occupation for centuries. It wasn't always that way. You know, the Aztecs probably thought they had a good thing going until the boats showed up. Things can change. Russia. Do you think that there was ever people in Russia in the 1920s and 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s who were just getting brutalized and murdered? You think they ever thought, it's never going to change. This is it, and this is it forever. And there's a new sheriff in town now. It did change there. It can change here. It changes throughout history. I hope we will all live long enough to see it change. We may not, but that doesn't mean that it's not going to. I do believe that it can. I do believe that it will. This current age, this existing order will fall. But come what may, we have to be strong and courageous. It has been an incredible journey. It's an incredible life to live in such a time. An incredible opportunity to live in a day where evil reigns and to be able to stand against it. That's a wonderful thing. I've got two things here. I'm proud of this. Well, this was my first book, and we've got a few copies that I grabbed on the way out. This was back in 2010. But then this, we brought several copies of this. If people don't have it, this is the summer issue, the summer 2024 issue of the Barnes Review, and it is an all-Southern issue. And if you liked anything I had to say today, as I said, I kind of put this together pretty quick. It was an adaptation of a chapter I wrote in the book, The Honorable Cause. And the transcript of a lot that I said is in this magazine. We've got some copies. It also has a very long Q&A with Sam Dixon, who's going to be here tomorrow. Sam Dixon and Jared Taylor tomorrow. What about this lineup Mike Wharton put together? And so anyway, we've got both of these. My son's manning the table back there, so we'll see what happens. But come and get a copy. No matter what, there are some things that I like to say to Southern groups, but no matter what group I'm talking to, no matter what state I'm in, no matter who it is, I always, every time, without exception, close with one of the most defiant and glorious quotes of all time, these immortal words from General Patrick Cleburne. They still my resolve, and I find inspiration every time I read them. And as he put it, if this cause that is so dear to my heart is doomed to fail, then I pray heaven may let me fall with it while my face is toward the enemy and my arm is battling for that which I know to be right. I love you folks. Thank you so much for having me back down here. And let's enjoy the rest of a great weekend together. Yeah.
Well, I heard that Mel Gibson's dad was a Jeopardy champion.
He was. Yeah, he was a smart guy. Yeah, he was a Jeopardy grand champion, and he was on Quiz Show. Anybody remember Quiz Show back in the what was it, the 50s or 60s? He was a smart guy. All right, Mike.
Hey, y'all see why we asked James back again this year? He'll be getting a call. We called him back in the spring about coming back, and he agreed to, and I got a feeling he'll be getting another invitation. We'll be doing the program here tomorrow night. Tomorrow afternoon, we're going to be doing one with Mike Gaddy. I'd like to say a couple things before we close. One, James, we do have hope. And that's what drives us. That's what keeps us moving forward, is that hope. And they can't take that. They'll never take that hope from the Southern people. We might give it to them, but they're not going to take it. The other thing, Drew Lackey, James. Drew Lackey spoke here in his later years. Drew was a friend of mine. I sold some real estate for him. For his daughter, she lived up the road about 10 miles. And he was more forthcoming in person than in his book. And he told a story about Rap Brown. If anybody remembers old Rap, anybody old enough to remember Rap much? Big old black instigator. They got after him in Montgomery. He was an agitator down here, stirring up trouble. And this is the city cops. They run him all the way to Lounsboro in Lowndes County. And he said, we got him. He said, we didn't get him like I wanted to. They brought him back and put him in jail, so they didn't. And then he told the story of Rosa Parks, and you see that picture, that iconic picture of him fingerprinting her. That was their third attempt before it finally took. The man that demanded her seat was part of the play that they were putting on. But like I say, it took them 3 times to pull that off. Rosa Parks' whole life was based on a lie. And that's a true story as told by Chief Drew Lackey. And had the pleasure of knowing the man, had supper with him at his daughter's house after he'd moved in there a lot of times. And they were friends of mine. And they're definitely friends of the South. And then closing out today, and for James's Mississippi roots, is Governor Bilbo, from back in the 40s, a 2 or 3 times governor, 2 times senator, Governor Bilbo. And I'm going to paraphrase just a little bit because he loved Mississippi. But Governor Bilbo was in what's now called Vaught-Hemingway Stadium, where Ole Miss plays football. And that place is packed with Confederate flags. It's packed with Southerners from one end to the other. And Governor Bilbo comes out and says, hey, said, I love Mississippi. I love her people. I love her customs and tradition. And when he said that, that whole place just come alive. They all stood up. I mean, you can pull it up online and see it. But that was Governor Bilbo. And the kind of love that people have, and we still have, and we have that hope. And we certainly go not giving up our customs and tradition. And humility is one of them. And one thing we don't like a boastful person. And so we look at our political candidates. Some of them are very boastful. And that's something we don't admire in a man, particularly a man. But we love Dixie. We love our people. We love our customs and traditions. And most of all this afternoon, we love the Lord, and we love all of y'all. God bless and God save the South. Thank you.